Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the CTO Club podcast with me, Sam Baker. And today we'll be discussing the current state of the public and private cloud market with Broadcom CTO, Joe Baguley. First of all, I'm going to take a moment to pass over to Joe just to give a bit of an introduction to himself.
Yeah, hi. So my name is Joe Baguley. As Sam just said, I'm the CTO for EMEA for Broadcom. For those of you that don't know Broadcom, I actually came in with the acquisition with VMware, and I've been at VMware and Broadcom now for a total of nearly 14 years. But Broadcom's a much larger company that covers a whole gamut of things, from building the silicon that sits inside your iPhones through to the core of AI and data centers and all the people, the main players you see today, right through to building clouds, public clouds and private clouds. And so that's what we're here to talk about today.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you for that introduction. So let's dive into the kind of main topic. So first of all, I wanted to start off with, I guess, what your current view of the state of the private and public cloud market is, and what impact is that having on businesses currently?
Yeah, it's a really interesting time. If you look back in history, if we go back let's go back to 2006, 2007, when the whole world was going public cloud and Amazon was talking about EC2 and it was all going to be the wonderful future. And if you spoke to people back then, probably, in that period, sort of 2007, 2008, we were all being told that by 2015, there'd be no IT departments anymore. Everything would just be done in the cloud and no one would need any data centers because it would all just be centralized. And a lot of people bought into that. A lot of people saw that as the vision. A lot of us older, I was old even then, more pragmatic folks sort of sat back and went, no, this is just really adding another consumption option to what people are doing with compute. But, what it did was it introduced, in doing so, it introduced some fantastic new tools, techniques, technologies, ways of looking at compute, ways of looking at applications as a whole that's transformed our industry. What's not happened is we've not all ended up in some public cloud somewhere or a selection of public clouds. As we now look across the landscape, realistically, here we are in 2024, most large organizations still have both on-premises and off-premises compute. So if you want to call off-premises is stuff that's in the public cloud, be that, a hyperscaler, and on-premises being stuff that's in everything from, in their stores up to and including, their own data centers or colo or whatever else where they're renting to run their infrastructure. And interestingly, there's been this sort of trend of cloud first. Everyone wanted to be cloud first. It was really cool. I actually had a T-shirt made by one of our partners because I did a presentation about 3 years ago called "Cloud First is Not Cool," and it's still upstairs somewhere. I must go and dig it out. But the point I was making there was really the reality that we're now finding ourselves in 2024 is a lot of people were going around saying, well, the answer is we put it in public cloud, what's the question? And then looking at everything they had and working out how they were going to put it into public cloud. Whereas the reality we're in now is much different. It's much more, okay, we've got some stuff in public cloud. Maybe it's not gone as well as we thought it would. We've not quite got as much as we thought we would get into there. It's stalled. There's talk of repatriation. There was a recent Barclays CIO survey which talked about 83% of CIOs are looking at repatriating some workloads. I'm not saying there's some huge trend around that, but there's signs in the market that we're settling down to what I'd refer to much more as right workload, right place. So rather than choosing, the functional side of things or the off-premises is how we define what we do. We look at what we want to do and then work out which is the best option, which is really where we are. Absolutely. And one of the things I wanted to touch on was maybe the cost being a factor in that. With regards to public cloud. So I guess from your perspective, what do you think the current cost implications of public cloud environments are, and how do you think that's impacted businesses? And I guess leading on to that, how are they approaching the rising cost? Yeah, so if you look at it, originally people looked at public cloud because it was cheaper, right? It's cheaper, more flexible, a whole bunch of different reasons, but cheaper was seen to be one of the things. And in certain cases, it did. The original argument around public cloud was rather than having to go and build a huge bit of infrastructure to do a small thing, you can go and just pay for the small bit you need and then scale as you want to. I think what people are finding, though, is you've got a hyperscaler out there running on 30% margins or more. When you start to run at a steady state in that hyperscaler, you're potentially spending more money than you thought you would be because, obviously they're making money on it and it's costing you. So the conversations we're hearing across the industry are very much around I'd really like, we'd like to cut down our cloud costs, but we're stuck here with this public cloud and we've got no way of getting out or cutting our costs? What do we do? And there's a lot of those conversations going on. People then sort of look back to their on-premises as maybe that wasn't so bad all along, but actually because they focused so long on the public cloud and getting onto there, what they've almost done is neglected their private cloud infrastructure. The private infrastructure is probably not even a private cloud. Someone might call it, the company name private cloud version 2.0 is what you normally hear, or whatever it is they're running. But it rarely is. It's not had the investment. It's not had the focus, because the leaders up there are all like, well, I'm not going to spend money on that because we're all going to public cloud. So what you're now sitting in is people saying, well, I'm in the public cloud. It's costing me more than I thought it would. I'd like to find some alternatives. Other clouds aren't looking cheaper. I know I could do it cheaper on-prem, but when I look at my on-prem at the moment, I'm looking at something that is not good, way more expensive. And so, it's almost like we've underinvested in that area. And whereas we're seeing realistically, if you do it right, it can make a huge difference. Anecdotally, I was told by one of our partners recently, they were approached directly by one of our customers, or their customers, saying, they wanted to save £3 million in their public cloud spend, which is a huge chunk. And turn around to this partner, and the partner said, well, we've looked across the whole thing, and the only way you can save money is by moving to on premises, build your own private cloud or colo or whatever, and get out of that public cloud. And the CIO goes, well, I can't do that. And the question is, well, can't or won't? And it was about losing face. The CIO, his identity was built on everything's going to be fine in the public cloud. But when he was told that actually to save money, you need to do something the way you don't think is right, it didn't work with him. But at the end of it, they came in a proposal that ultimately saved them £4.5 million by moving stuff to being back on-prem in terms of annual operating costs. At the same time, he didn't believe them. So he sent out and got some external consultants in who just walked in and went, yeah, they're not lying. It's true. And this is a story I'm hearing across the industry where people are starting to realize, actually, if you're going to be running something and you're going to be running at a certain size for a certain period of time, it probably might be cheaper to look at actually doing, it's the classic, like when you're looking at a mobile phone, you go from pay as you go, or do you go for, I know I'm going to be using it this much, I'm going to tie myself in for a guaranteed known cost. It's a fairly simple thing.
Absolutely. And do you think there's an issue with especially larger companies when they have very big public cloud estates that they maybe lose track of some of the services they're using, and that kind of increases the cost base across that tie-in that they have?
Yeah, I think also it's interesting because they're being exposed to cost they didn't really see before. So at the same time, you've got sprawl, and we used to call this shadow IT back in the day was the cool term, right? Is that people are just going off and buying their own cloud components and bypassing the IT organization. So that's one thing. So and typically they get to the point where it was working, and then they go, oh, I can't afford all this, I'm going to hand it to IT. And that was a huge problem, still is today. But yeah, there is a sprawl problem. There's a problem with organizations not getting a proper handle on what they're doing in public cloud. It's very difficult to see that. In some cases, the pricing models can be a little bit obfuscating, and typically what you miss in there is it may look like the compute's cheap, for example, but suddenly you find that you're paying over through the nose for storage, or you're paying massively for network ingress egress fees, or whatever it is. There's some way you're being got which you didn't think about, which means that maybe you need to start architecting your products around a cost model, which is not necessarily the right way to do things either. But at the same time, I think a lot of people were having costs hidden from them on premises. So when they were just running in IT internally, a lot of costs weren't truly exposed to the business. So, for example, it's classic. The classic one was even within an IT department, you'd go and get a server, you'd go rack it up in a data center, but you'd never be sent electricity bill for it because that was paid for by a different department that was doing the M&E for mechanical electrical billing for the building, and you never saw that. Whereas when you go and buy from public cloud, that cost's all wrapped up in one. So again, people start to say, well, actually, this is looking quite expensive now. It's like, well, yeah, but on-prem, you never really looked at it properly. So part of the challenges we see is the economic modeling for people saying, okay, well, I want to do a private cloud and I want to be cheaper than public cloud, which is entirely possible. We're seeing people be 2x, 3x cheaper than doing things in public cloud regularly. But to do that, they've got to think about properly running a private cloud. They've got to think like a cloud operator on-prem. And that's a real challenge for some people. So yeah, there's a cost problem. There's a huge cost problem. It's the number one thing, and the number one conversation. I've just had a conversation this morning with a very large bank where the conversation there was, we need to prove that what we do on-prem for a combined, private cloud platform that supports VMs and containers is cheaper than what we do in public cloud. But it's actually, we're helping people more on the cost modeling and the economics than it is necessarily on architecture.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, that's very good insight. Thank you. And just touching back to the Barclay survey that you mentioned, with some of the CEOs planning to repatriate some of their workloads. I guess from a cloud provider's perspective, how do you think they're going to, adapt to, people maybe taking a different view on things now?
Well, I think you can to a point, you can see it in some of the cloud providers. And we've seen it for a long time. So a lot of the hyperscalers have realized there's going to be on-prem. They've realized there's going to be an on-premises component to that. So for a long time, they've been talking about their own versions of on-prem infrastructure, whether that's, Azure Stack, AWS Outposts, Google, whatever, the Google private cloud version, I can't remember off the top of my head, all these things are coming as ways to say, okay, well, you can use our technology, but you can use it on-prem. And again, that's possibly a response, but it's not gone as well as I would expect. Anyway, it's gone as well as I expected. I don't think it's gone as well as they expected in the marketplace. Because what you're really doing is you're hitting the other challenge there is it's not just about cost, it's about complexity. So, when we talk to CIOs, the real thing we hear back from them is that it's sort of a complaint around public cloud around the 3 Cs, which is cost, compliance, and complexity. So we talked about the cost piece. The other piece is around the complexity, and that's complexity of operations. So if I've got to run something on premises, if I've got to run different types of things and get that thing to come on premises and integrate with my security stance on-prem in my data center, it's just another layer of complexity to add. So people are sort of saying, I've spent all this time trying to get rid of silos, and now you're saying that I've got to bring on-prem some kind of silo from your cloud so I can operate on-prem. Doesn't quite work with me. And there's a skill set, there's the usual challenges people are having around skill sets, etc. So I think there's been a long-term response for many years around the fact that the public cloud providers, the hyperscalers, realize it's not all going to be in public cloud. I think that their efforts to be on-prem have been around for a long time. Equally, the flip side, interestingly, you can buy a service which provides you with VMware Cloud Foundation on all of these. So if you wanted to do the on-prem private cloud, but take that technology and skill set and go and do it in Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Oracle, IBM, you can do that too. So there's this sort of integration and crossover across all of that. And so I think all of us vendors out there are looking at and realizing that we've got to be more flexible and provide choice to customers. So it's there for definite. I just think what's dead in my eyes is this: everything's going to be in one public cloud or even 2 or 3.
Absolutely. And do you think that they will potentially look to be more flexible on the pricing, as that seems to be a big issue now for companies who are in this situation already?
Yeah, I think the important thing here is actually something that we brought out as well, which is flexible licensing or portable licensing. So the fact that people can, rather than licensing being tied to where it's running, it's being tied to what it's running. So, for example, with us, you can go and license VMware Cloud Foundation on-prem and have license portability to take that into Amazon or, and the other hyperscalers too. So it makes life a lot easier as you're moving things backwards and forwards. And so I think you've got to, when you talk about that flexibility on price, it's not necessarily about flexibility of what it costs, but it's flexibility of where you're using it, how it's being used, and not tying people into, frankly, what have been in the past quite convoluted and a bit weird pricing models, right? Pricing models where you have to license, for every possible instance you could ever have and all this other kind of stuff. There's the famous one about, Oracle licensing. I love the meme there where the Oracle car park, whereas I want to park one car. It says, well, no, you've got to pay for all the spaces in the car park because you could technically park in any one of those spaces, Right. That kind of licensing, I think, is what's going to bite people. And I think that's what people are really driving change around. So it's not just choice in tech, it's choice in licensing.
Cool. And I guess, as companies now are potentially looking to transition, some of their workloads back on-prem, how can they do this effectively and efficiently, I guess?
I think there's no simple answer to any of this kind of stuff, right? It's not, okay, what you can do is buy this tool and click next, and it all works. I think it's much more, it's a functional way of thinking, and it's an organizational way of thinking. And I've got this thing rather narcissistically call Bagley's law, which is any conversation about technology always ends up being about people and process. And, when I go and talk to these customers, typically the barriers to these things moving around or doing what people want to do, they're rarely anything to do with technology. It's rarely a technology barrier. Typically, it's to do with people and process binding them up. So if anything, what they're looking at is people have looked at the public cloud was easier to engage with. It was much easier to use, etc. So when you're repatriating workloads, or when you're looking at, okay, how do I make sure that I've got on-prem being as good as off-prem for future choices or future workload placement, it's how do I make sure that what I'm doing on-prem looks and feels like public cloud does? Because that's what's so cool about those hyperscalers, right? You just go click next. Here's a list of services, build your app, bang, off you go. It's really, really nice and simple. That's what people need on-prem. That's what, without being too much of a sales pitch, that's what we're building at VMware with VMware Cloud Foundation. That's what we're doing is this, we're going to make private cloud on-prem, and have done, as easy as you would do with a public cloud. That's the goal. But to do that, organizations need to sort of break down a whole bunch of silos. If you talk to most organizations, they're still organized in silos on the compute team or the network team or the storage team. There's very rarely even a platform team or whatever. Whereas if you go and talk to a cloud provider, that they provide a cloud service, and that's what you do. And we're focused on providing the cloud service. So the reason why some of these organizations don't operate effectively is because of that, and they're stuck in these silos. And so, what we're trying to help people through is how you change that, how you make that difference. And we've seen it. When we did a study with IDC, and IDC did a white paper on this, where in the existing infrastructure paradigms that people have, this legacy architecture, these silos on-prem, we're seeing on average about 30 to 40% higher cost of operations, higher physical server footprint, higher infrastructure costs, and sort of that 3-year cost per VM is about 30%, 34% higher or whatever. So, it's much more about get your house in order, think much more like a cloud provider, operate like a cloud provider, build a cloud service, and then you'll find you've got those choices.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I guess, how do you see the shift towards maybe more multi-cloud and on-premise environments shaping the future of enterprise infrastructure in general?
It's shaping the future of applications in a way that we always wanted to. When I first started with VMware years ago, I was looking at a thing called, I was involved mainly for a couple of things. One was creating what became the software-defined data center as a concept, but the other was Cloud Foundry, which back in 2010, 2011, we were talking about platform as a service when no one even knew what that was or really understood how to use or consume it. But the idea with that was we would have this thing that you could run anywhere, and you would turn up and you'd say, what's your application run on? And you go, oh, my application runs on Cloud Foundry. And then Cloud Foundry is the thing that sits across and spreads across all those clouds. And I think as we look forward, that's really going to be the goal. When you're trying to look in a multi-cloud operating model, or a hybrid cloud operating model, realistically, is what you're looking at. I mean, definitions, what's multi, what's hybrid, whatever, not have that now. But in essence, what you're trying to say is, okay, where's a level of commonality of operations across that? And that's really what people are trying to fight for. If I go and talk to the customers that I'm talking to, the CIOs and CTOs, they're all saying, I'm trying to build a common operating model. I'm trying to build a common operating platform or common whatever. So I think, we've had various stabs at that over the years. And sort of you always have to start at the lowest common denominator, which at the moment is sort of containers and VMs, and maybe Kubernetes on top of that as a common layer that we're talking to. And what's the next APA layer above that? It exists already. It's something called PaaS, open source PaaS, like Cloud Foundry, but you need to write your apps for that. So there's this long journey we're going to go on in the next few years where people start to realize where their points of commonality between these platforms are and where the differences are. And it's the differences is where the cost comes and where the complexity comes and where risk comes and security and everything else. So the more you can get that commonality, the better. So that's what really we're seeing us work on. And, obviously the answer from Broadcom is that you have to just run VCF everywhere. I'm not saying that realistically, but it is certainly what a lot of our customers are realizing. But more importantly, I think it's just having a much more intelligent way of thinking about where that commonality of operations is going to be. So you'll see us go through. There's been many stabs in our industry at this, many open source projects, many initiatives, you name it. Even at a European level, we've had things like GaiaX running and other different things. And I'm seeing another one being proposed now to me in sort of, in NDA as the next thing that's going to happen to solve this problem. But realistically, I think we're going to have to just settle for the fact that we're going to have a heterogeneous environment in IT. You're going to have on-prem. You're going to have off-prem. You're going to have understand there's procedures, policies around security, compliance, you name it, that you're going to have to work around having different things. We're never going to just get one thing that everything runs on. It's just not going to happen because different things hit different needs. And we've not even talked about edge here, Sam, right? And there's a whole piece on what's going on at the edge and everything else, which is also going to drive some of this. As we start to see AI coming into this space, we start to see this huge amount of local data generation, et cetera, et cetera. There's another whole podcast alone we could do on that.
Yeah, I mean, you've teed me up for my next question quite nicely there, so well done. So yeah, I was going to ask if there are any kind of specific advantages by adopting a multi-cloud or on-premise approach, particularly as AI and kind of large data sets become more central and more important within businesses.
Well, I think people need to understand and take a pragmatic view that you're going to be running workloads in public clouds, in private clouds, and at the edge, no matter what sort of organization you're running. And so you need to have an applications model, an operations model, a compliance, a security, a risk, everything else model that just understands you're going to have those environments running and work out how you're going to approach those. And there's massive advantages to be had from doing that. Because when we look at one of the major drivers we're seeing right now, obviously LLMs, AI, Gen AI, all that kind of stuff is popping up hugely. It's something we've been, from a machine learning perspective, we've been playing with HPC machine learning for a very, very long time. This latest evolution is really interesting to us. But from a perspective of a cloud, it's just another workload. You need to understand that what you're looking coming into your organization is you're going to have the needs for specific hardware. So you're looking at XPUs. When I say XPUs, it's because some people call them GPUs, some people call them TPUs, some people whatever. We do all types. Ultimately, you're going to have, as opposed to the lovely homogeneous bunch of CPUs with some RAM and storage attached, which what everyone wants, you're going to have some very specific network cards. You're going to have some very specific, that do RDMA. You're going to have very specific processors of GPUs and TPUs and etc. in there. So you're going to need some kind of layer and approach to make sure you're not building yourself a bunch of future silos. One of the things we see quite a lot is people, going and buying some great big cluster from NVIDIA and then it sits in the corner and it's underutilized. It's, not quite maximized because it's treated as a silo. So people need to understand that we need to look forward and building these platforms and understanding this operating model is the fact that the future is going to be heterogeneous from an infrastructure perspective right down to the chipset, including the applications as well. So at one point, someone's going to turn up and want to do some fantastic thing with the database. Great, crack on, we know how to do that. And then you go, well, actually, this person over here wants to go and attach some models at a random timing down to some particular GPUs and of a particular type and run them for a period of time or whatever. And you're like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Put that layer in place is really what we're talking about here. And that could be on-prem, off-prem, whatever. So again, this assumption we're going to have an homogeneous world, never going to happen. And also, it always amuses me, Sam, right? And this always makes me laugh, is that people always do IT projects thinking they're going to finish. I've worked in IT for over 30 years now, and I've never seen an IT project really finish. They always just kind of dribble on and change and morph and whatever, because the one thing you can guarantee is halfway through your project, something's going to change, a new technology is going to come out. So, you've got to understand we live in a constantly moving world, and people are, but at the same time, people are always looking for some kind of stability. And so it's that constant fight and battle. It's fun.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, going back to, businesses that are maybe going to try and balance their environments more in a multi-cloud or an on-premise environment, for example, how difficult is it for them to evaluate, I guess, which workloads are suited better for a particular environment?
Very, actually, to be fair with you, it's really not easy, because again, you've got to look around the requirements around things like sovereignty, for example. You might find the particular security requirements around that workload. We have a lot of conversations to do a lot as the people that provide sovereign clouds. That's a huge topic of conversations, people who care about security. So that may be one thing you want to think about is, okay, well, I have this workload has to run, and that could be a public cloud, but it could be a public cloud that provides particular sovereignty and guarantees around data usage to do with whatever industry or physical or logical restraints you have to do with your activity. So that's one thing to think about. That's you could put that under the banner of compliance. Then at the same time, you've got to think about future expandability. With this workload, if I build it here, what if it suddenly gets 10 times as successful? Can I suddenly make it 10 times as big? What's the there's so many questions that you could go through around this, that it's not an easily solved problem. I think the important thing here is to be focused on the needs of the application, not on picking a destination as the answer. So, it comes back right to my very first point, is that it's like, the answer is this public cloud, right? How are we going to get everything into it is not the right approach. That's frankly stupidly arrogant, in my opinion. To someone to assume the fact that this one public cloud over there is going to meet all of your IT needs today and will also meet them all in 5 years' time as well is frankly mental. I don't think that makes any sense. However, what you should be doing is looking at the application needs, trying to predict the application needs, then looking at, well, what are the benefits of running in public cloud, private cloud, whatever, around those. I think that's the process. That's where really people are going to, make a difference to their business.
Okay. And finally, last question. So I guess from your perspective, looking into the future with your crystal ball, do you see multi-cloud and on-premise solutions continuing to grow? And I guess could new technologies, eventually shift the way that looks in the future from your perspective?
Definitely, without a doubt. There is no question that on-prem is growing. It's not shrinking. Even those people that have had cloud-first strategies for a long time have turned around when that's not going so well, look back at on-prem and realize not only is it in a mess, but it's also bigger than they left it, because people have still had to add things, because the apps that were running there have had continual needs of growth. No, you're going to see growth everywhere. There's going to be growth on-prem, whether that's driven by AI or LLMs or whatever it is. There's going to be growth there. There's going to be growth in public cloud. There's going to be growth and massive growth at the edge as well. As more of these technologies you see more and more processing, more and more storage pushed down into those edge spaces, and more technology being pushed in there. So yeah, it's the simple message is, on-prem's not dead. It's not going to die. People are going to be doing it long after I'm dead. So this whole thing about, public cloud's going to win, not going to work.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the insights, Joe. I really appreciate it. It's fascinating to hear from you around this topic. So I really appreciate you coming on, and I'll catch up with you again soon.
No worries. Cheers, Sam. Good to chat. Thanks.
Cheers. Bye.